Hello, and welcome back to the Personal Transformation Experience podcast. Excuse a little bit of the background mess there, but like life, it's a little messy at times. We are working on creating a new set, and long story that we don't need to tell anyone today. But what we are going to tell you about today or talk about is internal family systems, which was founded by Dr. Richard Schwartz and has impacted and helped with personal transformation for both Maureen and I. We're going to get right into it. We're going to talk about what is IFS, and from the ifsinstitute.com. IFS is a transformative tool that conceives of every human being as a system of protective and wounded inner parts led by a core self. We believe the mind is naturally multiple, and that is a good thing. Just like members of a family, inner parts are forced from their valuable states into extreme roles within us. Self is in everyone. It can't be changed and knows how to heal. IFS, and this is again from ifsinstitute.com, is also a way of understanding personal and intimate relationships and stepping into life with the 8 C's of self-energy and self-leadership. Confidence, calm, compassion, courage, creativity, clarity, curiosity, and connectedness. So to read more about this, you can definitely see the book, No Bad Parts. But in essence, Maureen's going to show that book to you now. And we are not paid to promote this book. If somebody wants to pay us to promote it, I won't say no to it. But we are not receiving any money for this. Or for this podcast at all. We don't have any advertisers or anybody. We're doing this really because we like to share what we've learned with other people. But back to IFS, it's really about self-leadership. So I think to kick us off, I know, Maureen, you wanted to tell us about how IFS has helped you reframe your own past traumatic experiences.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I found really powerful about it was to realize that you have all these parts, So that like you see it on in the movies and stuff, like the devil and the angel, right?
Right, that's true.
Well, that's just 2 parts, right? I mean, but so you always have a good part and a bad part. Well, they're not. Your parts are all, there's no bad parts, right? So the idea is there are no bad parts. What the parts do are they protect. They become protector parts. So, and they develop typically when you're younger as a result of some trauma or adverse childhood experience. And the part takes over to protect you when you're younger, and then it becomes a little bit maladaptive as you grow older because the parts stay there. So, but as you grow and develop, you sort of manifest new parts, right? New parts will show up to protect you from certain things in your life. Maybe they're sort of conceived from the other parts that you have that as you get older. But the bottom line is you have all these parts inside of you. And one of the things that I really struggled with was I had a stage fright, like fear of public speaking, fear of speaking in front of anyone, a group, going on an interview. I would have severe panic attacks where I was not able to function. I mean, I couldn't perform. I couldn't speak. And this went on since I was in my early 20s. And I never really addressed it until recently when I had another type of trauma that has nothing to do with public speaking. But I found a trauma therapist, specifically trauma therapist, because I've had therapy most of my life in the form of cognitive behavior therapy, which is kind of like talk therapy. And what that did is it kind of put me in a feedback loop, right? Yep. So I kept thinking about the problem, and I went around and around. So it was like a vicious cycle.
That's fascinating.
It kept bringing up the bad experience, but didn't allow me to process anything. Like I was not processing the problem through the
it was just talking.
It's just talk therapy.
Right.
Yeah, it was no processing. And so when I finally met someone who did something called ART, which was accelerated resolution therapy. It's a little bit connected to IFS, but IFS wasn't conceived yet. I mean, he didn't write this book until later, and maybe it was. We just didn't. I don't know when he wrote the book, but so anyway, so I started there, and that addressed the parts inside of me, the little girl that was traumatized, and it allowed me to process those parts or those experiences. And then when I moved out out of New York and into South Carolina, and I found another trauma therapist. She introduced me to IFS, and she used IFS along with other aspects of different like psychology. And she actually created her own method called Ibredio, but it is influenced by IFS. She does use IFS, and she uses a bunch of other stuff. And I'm really excited to take this course.
You know, I just realized I don't remember how you found Patty.
I looked her up. I was looking for someone else who did accelerated resolution therapy, and she did that. She had that on her resume or on her, sort of profile.
Okay. Yeah,
and she was a trauma therapist. I was looking for a trauma therapist because it was around the time when I had that experience.
Yeah.
But we're not going to talk about now. But anyway, so I did find her, and she did take the IFS training. And so when I realized I had these parts and I could talk to these parts and I could address them, like the one that gave me the panic attacks, it changed. It was a game changer. And then when you have my brain was disorganized from the trauma. So I had a very disorganized brain. And then when I addressed the parts, I did feel better. It didn't fully, take care of all the panic attacks because you have other parts in your body. So there were other parts that were causing issues. But when I did address them, I felt better and I felt more like it mattered. But you have to nurture the parts every day.
Right.
So, but I did feel like it was a powerful strategy and experience. It's like a meditation where you go into your body, you find where in your body you feel anxiety or fear or pain or whatever it is that's causing the depression, whatever. It's somewhere in your body because it will be somewhere in your body.
Oh, yeah. And again, that goes back to the body keeps the score.
The body keeps the score. So when you find that spot or that area in your body where it's causing pain or you feel the anxiety, you focus on it and then you talk to it. It's a part.
Yeah.
And that part will respond because it's part of you. Right. So that's why the internal family system, you have this whole family of the system of family inside you, all these parts, right? So you have whatever, like parts from when you were 4, when you were 11, when you were 13, and so you can address them. And it's a pretty powerful process.
And it's very different than other types of therapy. I know Patrick Tian talks a lot about the inner child and the sturdy inner adult. Mm-hmm. And that is really just, okay, there's the inner child and there's the current, should be inner adult. This is talking about maybe multiple inner children, right, that are impacting us. Like you said, the inner child from when we were 4, and there was this particular event that created that part. And then when you were 11, there was another, and so it's a different dynamic. And I don't want to sit here and say, well, one is superior to the other. I think it's whatever works for you. But I think
this resonated with me.
It worked for you.
Yeah, I mean, when I learned about this, I was like, oh my gosh, everything clicked into place. Right. It changes the response to triggers. So we all have triggers. Everybody has buttons that people can push. And so those triggers are typically, that developed in your body over time. You don't even realize you have them sometimes. But once you become aware, there's a part that's being triggered from some external stimuli. Yeah. Whether it's a voice, someone said something to you, a smell, a sound, a song, anything. And it triggers a response. So when you address the part that was triggered and you go through the process, you will find the event where it all began, right? It kind of takes you all the way back to the first time, because one of the big questions is when do you remember first feeling this?
Right.
Usually it's when you were little, when you were a child and there was an event. And a lot of times, it pulled events out of me that I never remembered, that I thought I had forgotten.
And I found that part very challenging to go back.
It was challenging to go back and remember stuff that you forgot on purpose, right?
Right.
I mean, you literally put these out of your mind because there were such harsh experiences that your brain doesn't want to deal with them. So you bury them somewhere in your body, and that's where it kind of manifests into pain, right? So
that you're not necessarily in the present connecting that pain with the event.
Right. It could be migraines are a big one that trauma patient, people who have trauma suffer from, which I suffered from. Yeah. So anyway, it changes the response to the trigger. So you keep the facts, but not the physical and emotional response. So I remember the event, I remember the facts, but my body's not connecting to an emotional or physical response. So, and this kind of serves to like recently I had another semi-traumatic experience, and I didn't have a panic attack, and I was able to keep it together. I got scared, but I didn't panic, and I was able to drive home, and I was okay. And so that to me is a testament to this kind of work, because had I not had the trauma therapy, I don't think I would have been able to even drive. Like, I was scared. I mean, my body was shaking. I was scared, but I didn't panic, and I pulled it together pretty quickly. So the resilience that it allows you to have when you get triggered is pretty quick.
But no small thing to get there. I mean, the work that you've done on this has been very hard work.
Yeah.
And has it been easy, like going back and bringing up these traumatic events from the past? Like, how is that?
That's really hard. But the thing is, what they do, the way, if it's done properly, they'll bring you to the event, but not so that you're disassociating like I used to do. I mean,
you're not asked to relive.
You're not asked to relive it, but you want to go through it. Use counting, and you go through the event, and you count to like 30, and you replay the event quickly. So what you do is you're actually watching yourself on a screen, watching the whole scene on a screen. So you are in fact disassociating yourself. So you're a third party watching yourself or watching the event as a child on the screen. And so it feels less traumatic that way, instead of it actually going through it inside your body.
And my memory of this is the higher self, right, is the one that's viewing.
So the higher self, your higher self comes in and views the event. And when you work more with your higher self, over time, you will find your higher self recognizing pain in other people that is their parts. So you sort of view things more with curiosity and compassion. So normally when somebody would trigger you about some kind of ideology or anything, they're being rude or sarcastic or whatever the trigger is, you typically, at least I mean, the idea is, and for me, I noticed that I'm not triggered by those things anymore. I'm like, I wonder, I get curious. I'm like, I wonder why this person feels that way, or why that is something that upsets them, or why they're like sucked into this sort of minutia, so to speak.
What part in them is... Yes.
And you wonder, I wonder what part of them went through something that's causing them to have to make this like something that's caused a pain point or suffering. So it's really interesting that over time, through this experience, I realized a couple of things. One, that I see people differently, like people that would trigger me, like my ex or somebody in my family, criticize or whatever. I view them differently, and I approach it differently. And because my perspective is different, and my approach is different, and my mindset is different, their response to me is different.
Yeah.
So you change the way you respond to people, and their response in turn changes the way.
Oh, that goes back to that Wayne Dyer quote. I've never thought about it this way until just now as you said that, because Wayne Dyer, when he was alive, said when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. But also when you change the way you respond to things.
To people,
right?
The way those people respond is different to you.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's like cyclicals, right? So you model the behavior you want to see in other people, and eventually they will give it back to you. So if ideally, well, and it does happen. It does happen over time.
I've seen that.
And time and time again, like I just feel like that's how my life. Because since this is such a powerful thing for me, that this is how I work now. This is how I think. This is my perspective. When I do anything in life, when I'm working with people and coaching them, when I'm with my children, when I'm with you, any relationship I have, friends, family, their response has changed. Even my family, their response is not the same because my response is different. If you want someone to change their response to you, you need to change the way you respond to them. Mm-hmm. And Esther, what was her last name? Perel. Thank you. Sorry, Esther. Perel said this, and it's brilliant because it is 100% true, and I find that to be something I live every day and recognize every day. But the other thing that I realized was that because I struggled so much with public speaking, and the part of me that was protecting me from experiencing panic attacks whenever I held me back from doing things in my life that would have helped me develop those skills. So recently I revisited something called the collaborative problem solving approach to working with people. And this is Dr. Stuart Albanon from thinkkids.org. Actually, Ross Greene originated this, and he also he developed this thinkkids.org from Ross Greene's approach, CPS. And they had a thinking skills assessment that I had a family that I'm working with right now. I had the mother and daughter do it. I took it, you took it, Finn took it. And what I noticed was my scores were lower in the language and communication development area. But I had, excelled scores in like cognitive flexibility because it tests 5 domains, right? Cognitive flexibility, emotional regulation, communication language, social thinking, and another one. I can't remember. But and I noticed that my scores were lower, and I was reflecting on that. And I thought, wow, maybe this is just a theory, my own theory for myself. I don't know if this is true, but it makes sense to me that I spent most of my life avoiding situations where I would maybe develop this skill because I was afraid that I never really developed it that well. Only now am I doing this podcast. I would have never had the confidence to do this podcast 5 years ago.
Right.
Never. I would have been scared to death. I would have had a panic attack. I would have avoided it at all cost. So I don't do those.
And that's why we
anymore.
don't care that we're not getting paid for this because there's so much intrinsic value that we've been receiving.
There's a lot of intrinsic value to it. And I feel like if it's valuable to me, it has to be valuable to someone else out there. So I'm hoping that someone somewhere hears this and is like, oh my gosh, maybe let me investigate that because I'm experiencing the same thing. I think a lot of people suffer from panic when it comes to public speaking. This is one of the most common panic
and I challenged
fears.
you quite a bit that you were like, well, that's just not my game. I'm just not good at that. I'm like, but why? Why would something...
I remember.
Because speaking is intrinsic to us as language, right? Yeah. Communication is more natural. Babies communicate, right? Expressively, no matter who's around, right? So I feel like who taught you that you weren't good at public speaking, right?
Well,
what taught you?
We know who taught me.
No, I get that, right? But I think that's a question when people say, well, this is something I'm not good at.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Now there are different things like maybe being able to play an instrument, right? I get that might not be a natural skill set for somebody.
But it's fun to try.
Yeah, but speaking is more, language is intrinsic to who we are, to the human experience, right? So who taught you that you're not able to speak in front of other people, right? That to me...
Well, it's who told you, right? It's who told me. I mean, I was told, growing up. You were
taught then, but you were taught to believe that you weren't able to speak in public.
Right.
And then...
Well, that my voice didn't matter and I was...
Right, so it became self-fulfilling. So when you went out and tried to speak in public, you screwed up, right? And then it was the inner voice, that inner part coming back saying, see, I tried to protect you from this. I tried to protect you from that embarrassment by telling you not to do it because you're no good at it. You went ahead and did it. People made fun of you or laughed at you, which proves what I was telling you.
Right.
And this is the
feedback. It's a feedback loop
of a part, of an inner part.
Right. So you get this reinforcing feedback loop.
Right.
With your parts. So it's like you get that negative voice like, I can't do this. I can't, I'm going to lose it. I can't tolerate this. I'm not going to do this. It's not safe. It's not safe. It's not safe. And so your mind keeps convincing yourself that doing a thing, going outside your comfort zone is not safe, so you're not going to do it. So it's a negative feedback loop.
Well, I've had that at work, right, in forays, and I'm gonna try and get more involved in conversations I wasn't invited into. And then if somebody acts a certain way, I'm going to say, well, see, that was a sign I should have done that, right?
Right.
And that's where this comes from. And then I think early on in my adulthood, I got involved in a romantic relationship with somebody who had bulimia. And in case you don't know what bulimia is, it's somebody that, is basically eating excessively large amounts of food and then purging their body of the food. And what I remember that person telling me, and this is in Richard Schwartz's book, which I found amazing. He talks about working with people with bulimia, but it was so true. This person would say to me, I'm constantly beating myself up and being told, in my head, I'm not good enough.
Right.
And so then I eat, right, to make myself feel better. And then this part of me is criticizing me for eating too much. And then I purge, right? So, it was basically this whole idea that there was this person, but when I got to know them better, I got to realize, this conflict that was helped created by their early childhood, but by their parents. Their parents were always like, eat all the time. Like, you're not eating enough. And then would say, you're fat. And, you don't do this. Well, you're not good enough at this. And so this conflict was kind of created. So that's why the things you say to your children are so critical. Because they then integrate and that's part of trauma, whether you speak to your children in such a way, you create a conflict, or you're verbally or physically abusing them, all these things then manifest in this part then they develop,
comes
out to protect
they develop
you.
protector parts, and there's all kinds of parts, but protector parts are the main ones. I mean, he gets into this book, he gets into all the other parts too, but it's just very interesting. The protector parts to me are the main ones, and that's what we'll stick to right now. But there's a bunch of other parts that protect the protector parts, and it gets a little complicated. But the bottom line is, you want to recognize it. There are parts that will drive the car, so to speak.
Yes.
And your higher self is not in charge. Those parts are taking over because they don't trust that the higher self can be in charge.
Right.
And so
they want to be safe.
That they want to be safe. Right. And they're trying to keep you safe because they still think you're a toddler. They still think you're 2 or 4 or 11 or 13, that you're not capable, right? So once you let them know, we're all grown up, thank you for protecting me. I've got this now. You can just relax and do what you normally would do, right? And just be who you are. Like, you don't need to protect me anymore. I'm in control. And you have to do this over and over again. It's not something that you say once, right? Just like any child, you have to tell them over and over again and convince them and nurture those parts so that anytime you feel that anxiety, or you feel like you might have, like for me, I feel the anxiety, I have to stop. Now that's a trigger for me to look inward. Like, that's my sign. Okay, I feel anxious. What's going on here? I feel like angry. I feel triggered and I don't know why. I feel my body like hyping up. I feel like I'm vibrating. What's going on? Why am I feeling this way? Right. There's nothing. I'm safe, right? And the first thing I do is like ground myself. Right? So I'll like rub my feet on the ground, or I'll rub my hand, or I'll look around and I'll get my, I'll use my senses to ground myself to say, okay, you're safe. There's nobody here going to hurt you. And then I have to look inside. And that's kind of just what you do. You just ground yourself and look inward to where the part you feeling the anxiety or the fear or the depression or the pain, and see if it's something that you can address.
Yeah.
Because chances are it may not always be like organic in nature, like something else is going on. Like if you're sick, that's one thing. But a lot of times if you're feeling disrupted, pain, stomach issues, migraine.
Yeah.
Take something for the migraine, but address the pain.
Right, look what's going on.
And see if something else is going. But I will say, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, but my own child, who is on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, I have to do a little more research on how the internal family system parts work, and develop adaptive parts. Not maladaptive parts.
I just want to clarify before you get into this discussion here that at one time your child was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And your child also believed that they had schizophrenia because they had these different parts.
Yes.
And schizophrenia is a manifestation of having different parts, but it's when those parts have become so severely traumatized that they're almost weaponizing your internal system.
Yes,
and they're like overly aggressive, right?
And they're taking over.
You become that person completely on the outside, right?
Right, and you're delusional, and and you have
and that's not what we're talking about here today. But that's an extreme form.
That is an extreme form, and he talks about that in the book also. Very interesting. But so this is what most females do who are on the autism spectrum is they create a world, an imaginary world, like most little kids create an imaginary world, imaginary friends. But young females, this is not, and the research, and the reason why I say young females is because the research doesn't show that males do this much. Right. This is more of a female thing because they're different, right? So I think there's a couple of factors that go into it, like societal norms and demands for females to be certain way, socially. Yeah. And so they mask. And so because they have to mask their symptoms, their autism symptoms, maybe they stim, maybe they are hypervocal, maybe they're really quiet, whatever the case may be, they don't fit in, and they're aware they don't fit in. And this is a lot of high functioning autism individuals who are female. And so a lot of them develop a world, an inner world, or as my child calls it, a mindscape. I had another young girl who's 9 that I'm working with call it the land of all the thoughts. It's very interesting. And she likes to go into her room when she gets home from school and go to the land of all the thoughts, which all of her pretend friends are there. Yeah. So it's very interesting though, because I was talking to my child and they talked about all the parts and how they actually did a mapping of the parts. Like she drew the picture of the parts, and then I furthered the experiment, what she was doing, and I had her draw a picture of a person and mark all the areas in her body where she feels these parts. So this is an exercise that Schwartz does in the book, No Bad Parts. It's very interesting. I did it, and it was a great thing to do because then I was able to identify all the parts that I could. And every once in a while I might identify a new part, but typically I just identified all of my parts. Yeah. But Finn identified her four parts, named them, but they all have adaptive aspects. So things that Finn is not able to handle, and that makes sense to me because they're still developing. So Finn is 20, and the brain is still developing, at least till you're 25 and even 30. I mean, so their parts help her deal with anxiety, fear, anger, dysphoria, and depression. And each part brings a specific strength to her personality. Like Lotor, they have the names, helped him through middle school. And as a leader and a fighter, Lotor is very emotional. And I can't read their handwriting. So another one is Blair. She's a psychologist. She's sarcastic, smart, and focused. They helped her with school. Also in middle school, this person developed in middle school, helped her to get through, being in school with other people, focusing, doing schoolwork. And the other one is Titus, fun-loving, happy, and maybe a mermaid.
And I think just for anybody watching, and I know it's somewhat controversial topic today, but obviously you're getting a little confused over the his and her and all that.
Well, because some of these parts are his.
That's what I was going to point out, that these parts...
Lotor's a boy.
Right.
Blair is a girl. Titus is a toddler.
I was going to say, there's masculine personalities here. There's feminine personalities. Right. I also don't think that that's completely, and I know this is highly politicized, but I think for a lot of people, there are aspects of self, right? For some that might be more feminine leading or more masculine leading, regardless of the sex assigned at birth. So, it's just very interesting. But autistic people are far more literal, far more black and white.
Yes.
So it doesn't surprise me at all that somebody on the autism spectrum can clearly identify they've got parts of self that manifest as these different
And they're very adaptive. So,
People in general,
and Finn she says to me, there are times when I don't want to be in the driver's seat and I let this part take over because I don't really want to deal. And I'm like, that's so adaptive.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. To me, it's adaptive right now. Like I'm not, maybe other people would argue with me, but these parts don't hinder their function.
Right.
Their everyday function. So when a part doesn't hinder your ability to function on a daily basis, and right now I don't see where it holds them back, I think that's adaptive. I have a good friend, the woman I'm working with, she has developed, her parts have developed a very sort of regimented way of living. And it's highly adaptive for her. So this kept her safe. It kept her, she's a single mom. She has a child, with disabilities. And she's been working, she's had no safety net, no family, no financial net, nothing. So it's all been on her. So she's developed this way of living that at first glance is hyper rigid and strict. And, very like everything has its place, almost an OCD, but it's highly adaptive for her because it's kept her and her child eating with a roof over their head and, with money and, but it also has her in a place where, she's kind of has a very small place where she is comfortable. Outside of her she won't go outside of her comfort zone right now, and that's okay because her child's young. She's doing what she has to do. I think over time I'd like to see her move past her comfort zone and experience life more fully, but right now she's like, I'm fine where I am. And I'm like, you know what, you've developed a highly adaptable way of living, and it works for you. Let's see how you can integrate it and make sure your child grows up emotionally healthy and resilient. And that's where like I'm working with her because it's really important that her child is not like her. You could see, her child's like, yeah, okay. I don't think she's going to be super fastidious and like her mom. She's not like her mom, and I think they clash because of that.
Oh, I'm sure.
So, but that awareness. I mean, they're doing amazing. She's so intelligent because she's able to embrace a different perspective. And that to me is just a sign of intelligence. So she's really smart and she's able to embrace this other perspective. But I am not there to push her out of her comfort zone. I'm there to show her that, you've developed this amazing way of living that has been highly adaptable for you. Those are her parts, protecting her.
Yeah.
So, and we'll get to where the parts came from over time and how her higher self is there. And her higher self is the one stepping in now, gaining these new perspectives and helping her child and embodying her own authority with her child rather than trying to seek that power and winning an argument or being right. Like she's seeing that, okay, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I think about that phrase, winning the battle, but losing the war. So trying to be right, but destroying a relationship with somebody, that's winning the battle and losing the war.
Yes, right, exactly. And so, and I think, when you grow up in an environment where you never learned how to regulate your emotion because you didn't have parents or caregivers that were able to ever regulate their own emotions, of course you're not going to learn.
Or
it's a learned
criticize
skill.
You for having the emotion,
right?
They didn't give you permission to feel.
Exactly, and that's another thing. You have to have permission to feel. So no, if you didn't have permission to feel, how could you ever learn to regulate your emotions?
Because you were like made to feel bad for having the emotion, right? So there would be nothing to regulate.
And so your emotions came into the picture, and they literally. Not sacrifice, but they would be a risk to ruining the relationship with your caregiver, your mom or whatever. So if you feel like
your emotions were too big for them.
Yeah, if you feel like your emotions are going to risk your relationship with your caregiver, your parent, then you're not going to feel them.
Right.
You're going to push them down. You're going to you're not going to allow yourself to feel them or process them, because you don't want to lose the attachment to your parent, and that's not a good thing. It's a dangerous place to be. Yeah.
Another reflection I had about this type of therapy was I remember 20 years ago when I was in, it was really talk therapy, but what I remember being different about that is she was trying to teach me to change the conversations I was having with myself. But really the conversation I was having with my inner parts, I just didn't recognize them as such back then. But I would talk to her about, well, when I was a little boy, people would say this to me or do this to me. She's like, well, you're not that little boy. That little boy is not in charge. You're the adult, you're in charge, and you can tell that little boy he's okay. So it's funny because I think back on it now and some of the things she said, and again, I don't, like you, I don't remember how long the IFS therapy's been around. Yeah. But my therapist 20 years ago was talking to me about the conversations I was having with my inner child or these parts of myself. So it was very interesting. So I was very open to this.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. Yeah. Because I never had a therapist talk to me about any inner child until I met Marcia Mandel in New York. And
so I think, and for both of us, I mean, I think that was super helpful. But I think we kind of talked about this, but I just want to make a few points that came out of the book. What Dr. Schwartz found out about the parts and why he says that there are no bad parts. And we've given plenty of examples of this. Yeah. First of all, destructive parts have protective intentions. Right. They have good intentions. And like you said, parts are frozen in past events when their extreme roles were needed. Yes. Right? They were trying to protect you again. Mm-hmm. And finally, when they feel safe to step out of their role, they are highly valuable. So I don't think we've touched much on that. I don't think we have a lot of time. But how is it that you feel that a part that feels safe becomes valuable to your internal family system?
Well, that brings me back to the communication and language piece. So the part that held me back, now that part doesn't have to protect me from anything, now it is free to learn and develop and feel comfortable and confident to develop better language skills and better communication skills.
Okay. So now it shows up in a way it's motivating you to improve.
Yeah, now it shows up. Yeah, and I think that's what happened eventually, like all the parts, like the emotional regulation piece, the, inability to like temper my anger, that part now can show up as a model for how to regulate emotion and gives me that hindsight, that insight, right? The hindsight that I need. Oh, I did this, but this works better. Right. So I think that's the true nature of that part was to regulate the emotion. Yeah. But then it got traumatized. So it became this protective part and put up a wall. And so, we're not going to do this. We're not going to let anything penetrate us because it's too dangerous.
Risky.
We're not safe. We are not safe. It's not safe to go in a situation where you're going to speak in front of other people because this happens. Yeah. So it becomes like cyclical, like that feedback loop. But once you heal that part and your higher self comes into play and your higher self says, I'm in charge. Well, you're free now to develop those skills more, as you go, like, I'm not afraid to.
Oh, I love that. It reminds me of the other saying that you say all the time, which I'm sure was a quote from somebody who borrowed it from somebody else, which is turn your mess into messages. So
turn your mess into messages. Yeah.
So I like it. So now this part becomes an advocate for you or somebody pushing you.
That's what I think. I mean, I don't remember reading that. I didn't finish the book yet.
I think all things are somewhat subjective that we can take, hey, what do we learn from it? How is it showing up in our life? It doesn't have to be the way Richard Schwartz wrote it. I mean,
I think it's individual and personal to everyone, but that's how I feel it's working right now.
Good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just to recap too, because I don't think we talked about this, but if you come across the book, those of you watching, it's great information, but there's 4 basic goals of this type of therapy. One is to free these parts from their forced roles, and we've talked a lot about why that's important and the examples of that. Restore trust in self and self-leadership. Like you said, if the parts don't trust that the self can lead, then they will try to lead, right? And they'll take over and lead, right? Your inner child or inner part child, right, is leading the adult. That's probably not the healthiest space to be in. So that's why it's important for the self-leadership to show up, right? And let the parts know, I've got this, right? I've got this. And that's what that imagery was in going back in time, where I remember Patty working with me is, your higher self needs to tell that inner part, you've got this, they're safe.
Yes.
And you're in control. You want to reharmonize the inner system, right? Otherwise, just chaotic in there, right? Everybody kind of doing their own thing.
Yeah, it's like the disorganized brain.
Yeah. And finally become more self-led in interactions with the world, right? And let your higher self, right, lead those interactions, not discounting those parts, because those parts serve useful purposes when they're in harmony with where the self is leading.
Yes.
So I think that's important. We talked about this before a little bit when you change the way you look at things, but we've also had this mantra, and I don't know if we made this up because I haven't read this anywhere else, but we believe that we change the world around us when we change the world within us. And actually,
well, it's the landscape of your internal family system, right? That if you think in terms of
that is the world within us, is
right?
This internal family
the
system.
world within us is the internal family system, and so when you do change that, when you work on changing that landscape and that dialogue, yeah, absolutely. Everything
I first
else
wrote about changing the world within me 10 years ago before I read this book, but so it totally resonated with me. It's like, okay, it all starts with this world that's going on in here, right? In the mind. It's all in the mind. Right, I'm going here, but it's really here, right? In the mind. So that is what you need to change, and then everything out here changes, right? Both because you're affecting change and because the world is responding
to you differently.
To you.
Because you have different energy. You bring different energy to the table. You're not. Yeah, it's a whole different mindset, and people sense that. People, they sense.
They'll see it.
Yeah, people sense it
differently.
Yeah, they'll know. Like, people can sense things about you. I don't, everybody does what you do consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah, I know. I've been showing up differently. I remember somebody telling me about 6 months ago, like, hey, you're showing up different today. What'd you have for breakfast? Which is a funny way of asking that.
What'd you have for breakfast?
And here maybe when people might say,
Two shots of vodka.
This guy autistic? Because I actually said I ate the same thing this morning I eat every day, which is my oatmeal, my blueberries, and my brown sugar. And they're like, okay. And people are like, that's not what I meant. I'm like, but now I almost do it for humor because I'm like, I know you didn't mean that.
Yeah.
So,
Finn would be like, 2 shots of vodka. Yeah.
But
kidding.
But I think the bottom line is this is hard work. Working on yourself, working on your inner parts, your inner family system is hard work.
It's hard work. It took years.
It's rewarding and will help you become the person that you were meant to be. Right?
Yeah.
Because we all have unique gifts and talents, and not having alignment within ourselves or having, some inner part that was created 30 years ago taking over is going to hold us back from being our optimal self. I like to say best or optimal self.
Yeah.
The best that we can be based on the gifts and talents that we have.
Yeah. I feel like the most valuable thing I got from all of this, besides, addressing these parts, is putting space between my emotions and my reactions. So your emotions are here and your reaction is here. Usually when you have an emotion, boom, your reaction's right on top of it.
Well, your emotion
but you want to respond.
Is a response to something else, external stimuli or whatever.
So you feel, right. So you have an external stimuli, you have an emotion about it, and then you have a response or a reaction. Your reaction is like that.
Right.
So the reaction's right on top of the emotion. But when you put some space between your emotion and your response to that stimuli, it gives you a chance to think. And once you think about it, you process it, your response is going to be way different.
Right.
Way different.
You're processing the response, right? Processing the stimuli that's coming in, because the emotional reaction, everybody's going to develop an emotion, and sometimes because of these inner parts, we may not always recognize why we're having that emotion. Like, why is this making me nervous? Why is this making me scared? Why is this making me sad? Not really sure. But if you react before you've processed, you're reacting sometimes without even knowing why you're reacting that way.
Exactly. Well, that's the problem. That's because
then people will turn to you and say, "What's wrong with you?" Right?
There's no space
right.
between it, so you need to get some space in between it. And I'd love to explore more about how individuals on the spectrum, neurodiverse individuals, develop these parts. I think it's a little bit different.
Okay.
I'd love to have a conversation with Richard Schwartz about that, because I think that's something that hasn't been explored.
Are you going to challenge him to come on our show?
I would like to, yeah. Dick Schwartz, come on. No, I really would love to know. I think there's a whole bunch of, a whole realm of a possibility to discuss there and research to look at.
Yeah.
Because especially with females, I mean, not that I don't want to look at males too, but because
It's different.
it's different with females, and females tend to develop these imaginary worlds and parts because they need them to sort of fall back on when they need to escape the real world that's really, really hard to deal with socially. So they escape into these worlds where it's not so hard, you know?
Yeah. And then they are the ringleader, right?
They're
more self-important.
Right. And, but you know, like, again, like Finn developed these parts and this little girl has all these imaginary friends. I didn't get into which ones how they serve her, but right now they serve her in a way that helps her.
And the training course you took, where that one person on there was talking about their own child having this imaginary world, and that was when you realize, hey, this is bigger than just.
Oh my gosh, that
you
symposium!
thought your child was unique.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're not, but you know, everybody's unique in some way. But the whole idea of the imaginary world is far more common than we realize.
She was a woman with autism. She's from the UK, and I will put her name in the show notes. I cannot remember right now, but she's the one that, for the first time in my life, when I was in this symposium for neurodiverse people, all these professionals came together in an international symposium.
Yeah.
I listened to this woman speak, and she described my child, and I cried.
I know.
I was crying. I couldn't believe how she described. I was like, "Oh my God, that's
really
my kid."
Interesting.
Never before in my life did I hear anybody talk about what my kid has experienced in that way.
Right.
I actually reached out to her.
Yeah.
I reached out to her. I was like, "Do you guys do training?" Like, she's like, "We don't do individual training."
Yeah.
But she has lots of videos and stuff, and I absolutely will find her name and put it in the show notes because that was phenomenal.
I really love doing the show. I think it's her 24th episode, believe it or not. I can't even believe we've been doing this almost 6 months. But I really love this conversation. This was really, really exciting. So I hope anybody who watched it found that it was exciting as well.
Yeah.
When you come back to us next time, I think we're going to have a new set. We're going to
we had to cover up some paint samples
talking
here.
about transformation. We're gonna see some.
We're going to transform some stuff.
New background next time. Ideally, is the situation. But if you have any comments about this episode, please feel free to leave them either on our Instagram page or on the underneath the video itself. If you like it, please like it. Subscribe to the Personal Transformation Experience podcast. We definitely love engagement and interaction.
Yes. So like us, subscribe, and Dick Schwartz, we're going to tag you. So I'd love to have that conversation or see what you know about that.
Okay. Challenge put out there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for watching us. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Okay. Bye.